Want to take a hunk of meat like this roast and turn it into tasty meat snacks like this? Stick around and find out how. It's basically biltong. So the first thing you're going to need is a cutting board and a sharp knife, like this big stabby butcher knife. Then you need yourself a piece of meat, like this roast. Next we need some salt. I'm using Costco's Kirtland Signature Pink Himalayan salt. It's not a fine or a coarse. It's somewhere right in the middle, a medium grain size salt. A little bowl for putting the salt in, some malt vinegar, and a little scale for weighing our salt. The first thing we're going to do is cut the string off, unless you're one of those weirdos that like to eat string, then keep it on. What do I care? You can see that this is a pretty lean piece of meat. It's just got one nice strip of fat on the outside, which is perfect for making biltong. But you can use any cut of meat, any fat content. This is an inside round oven roast, as you can see here. 11 bucks a kilo, costs $19. What we want to pay attention to is the weight. 1.730 kilograms, so 1,730 grams. For salt, we want 2% by weight for proper curing. So we're going to take our calculator. Our roast was 1,730 grams. We're going to multiply that by 2% or 0.02. And that gives us 34.6 grams of salt. Take your little bowl and your drug dealer scale and put your salt in the bowl. Now let's cut some meat in high speed. Doesn't matter if you cut with the grain or against the grain. It's still gonna be chewy like shoe leather in the end because it's dried down cured meat. So if you want to cut it into steaks, into chunks, into strips, that's all personal preference. Do whatever you want. One thing that does matter though is you want to cut the meat into, let's call it 1-inch pieces. That inch of thickness will give you either a nice even cure at the very end, or it'll give you a tough outside and soft inside depending how you like it. And we'll discuss that a little more later. Now we're going to take our meat and put it in a bowl so we can add in our pre-weighed salt. And we want a nice even coating of salt all over the meat, so we're going to add some salt, give it a nice little massage, add some more salt, give it another little massage. I don't know the difference between a massage and a massage, so just do one or the other. Now we're going to add the vinegar. Taste-wise, my personal preference is this malt vinegar or brown vinegar, which is what biltong is traditionally made with. You can use any kind of food-grade vinegar, so whether you're going to use white vinegar, a red wine vinegar, balsamic vinegar, apple cider vinegar, it doesn't matter. It's all what you prefer for taste, but the main purpose of the vinegar is to kill the bacteria. You can do this one of two ways. You can either dip your pieces of meat in a vinegar bath before you put them in your drying rack or dehydrator, or you can just dump in vinegar into the bowl. I'm going to add approximately 2 cups of vinegar here, and let it sit and soak in the fridge overnight. You can let it soak in the brine for as little as a few hours, or I prefer that my end product taste fairly vinegary, so I like to leave it in the fridge for 24 hours. Sometimes I can't wait that long. Like with this batch, it only sat in the fridge overnight. You can tell that by how red the meat still is. The longer it sits in the brine, the more pale the meat will become, and the stronger the vinegar taste will be. And the reason we do the second vinegar bath dunk is to make sure that every piece of meat has had vinegar on all sides in its little nooks and crannies. So that way there's no bacterial growth or mold start to grow either while it's in your dehydrator or afterwards when you put your meat into storage. As we're loading up the trays, a couple things to keep in mind. The dehydrator has a fan in it, so the meat needs lots of space between each piece for airflow so that they dry evenly. Other thing would be that you just dip the meat in liquid, so there's dripping happening. So you want some paper towels underneath your trays, but also in the dehydrator itself, this dripping will continue for hours and hours. So ours came with a plastic tray that I believe is for making fruit leathers. So I've just put that tray on the bottom to catch any of the drippings. So load up all the meat and put it in the dehydrator. Now that it's all loaded up, we're going to set the timer and the temperature. This dehydrator's lowest temperature only goes down to 95 degrees. You can't just turn the fan on separately, so as low as it goes is fine. And we're going to set the timer for 24 hours. Now we're back 24 hours later to take the meat out and see what we got. First thing you'll notice is the outside visually looks very similar to fat beef jerky, but when you try to bend it, you can see it still flexes fairly easily and it almost tears as you're bending it. So we'll cut into it and see what the inside looks like. Be very careful when you're trying to cut the meat up. The outside is very tough, so it makes it pretty easy to slip and try to lob a finger off or something stupid. This is pale colored to pink, which is what is called wet. If you are going to eat it within the next week and it's in the refrigerator, that is just perfect. If you want more long-term storage, what you want to see is the entire piece of meat the same color as the outside. So you might have to dry it for 48 to 72 hours. Once it's dried down to your preference, then you can store it in your refrigerator. Don't store it in a plastic container because there's still moisture in the plastic, and the salt in the meat will draw the moisture out of the plastic and your meat will begin to sweat and eventually mold. I prefer to keep mine in a paper bag down in the milk drawer, but a lot of times I just use a Pyrex container with a silicone lid, and that works just fine. You're going to eat it fairly quickly anyways, unless you're making really large batches. This stuff is super tasty and really chewy to the point that the pieces that have a lot of connective tissue on them, you can chew and chew and chew and chew. I like to call it meat gum. So there you go. That's how we make basic biltong. So you should give it a try and let me know how it goes down in the comments. And thanks for stopping by the channel. We'll see you next time.